Hi, I am Nneka and to continue the discussions made by my groupmates, we will now discuss about adjuncts and its semantic roles such as adjuncts of space, time, contingency, and process adjuncts. Stay tuned! In general, adjunct is a thing that is added to something else as a supplementary rather than an essential part. While in English grammar, it is a word, phrase, or a clause used to modify the meaning of another words in a sentence, yet when removed, will not structurally affect the remainder of the sentence. Also, adjuncts are one of the four main categories of adverbial. The others are subjuncts, disjuncts, and conjuncts. Now there are two main categories of adjuncts, the predication and the sentence adjuncts. Predication refers to the part of a clause or a sentence which follows the verb element. It is further divided into two subcategories, the obligatory and optional predication adjuncts. The second main category of adjuncts is sentence adjuncts. While predication adjuncts modify the verb element of a sentence or a clause, sentence adjuncts apply to a whole clause or sentence. Adjuncts can be realized by a wide range of grammatical structures, adverbial phrases, noun phrases, by finite and non-finite clauses. They can be categorized semantically as adjuncts of space, time, process, and contingency, which will be tackled for the whole discussion. The first semantic role of adjunct is the adjuncts of space. It denotes spatial location, motion, or distance. They typically answer the questions where and where to or from. Spatial adjuncts realize the roles by means of prepositional phrases, noun phrases, the determiners, and nominal clauses. Now we get here examples. First, we live in a peaceful countryside. In a peaceful countryside is the prepositional phrase. He drove a long way to meet his girlfriend. A long way here is the noun phrase. They told me to come this way to enter the car park. This way signifies the determiner. For the last one, her mother always wants to know where she is. Where she is the nominal clause for this sentence. There are three primary semantic roles that can be distinguished within the category of space: the position, distance, and direction. Space position adjuncts refer to a spatial setting or location for the process, a situation or event, and one or more of the participants in the process. For example, I'm traveling in Hanoi at the moment. We must work outside the building. Tom is on the top of the mountain. The words that were underlined are the space position adjuncts of each sentences. Space distance adjuncts refer to spatial extent and answers the question, how far? For example, athletes have to run about 50 kilometers. 50 kilometers here is the space distance adjunct. For the second, he is traveling a long way. Long way is the space distance adjunct. Space direction adjuncts characteristically co-occur with verbs that indicate movement in space, either to a location or from a location, such as go, come, travel, or move. For example, I tried to persuade my family to move to Baguio to live. To Baguio is the space direction adjunct in the sentence. They can also express general direction or path without stating the source. For example, I threw the box through the window. Through the window is a space direction adjunct. Now, we will discuss about adjuncts of time. Time adjuncts locate events and states in time or specify their duration or frequency. They are typically elicited by the question when, how long, and how often. Now there are various classifications of time adjuncts: the time position, adjuncts of duration and span, time frequency, and time relationship. Time position adjuncts establish a temporal location for a situation or event, refers to a point or period of time to an interval in the course of which an event takes place, or to a time span. It can be elicited by the question word when, and the time specified may be narrowly stated or left rather vague. For example, John was born in 1992. Here, 1992 is a time position adjunct because it answers the question, when was John born? Time position adjuncts are not limited to those narrowly stated sentences. In fact, they can also be stated in a broader sense. For example, John lived in the 20th century. 20th century is not specific year when had John lived, but it still states to what year had John lived. The second classification of a time adjunct is the adjuncts of duration and span. Adjuncts may express duration of specific or indefinite length, the durations in question being in the past, the present, or the future. Example: she worked in Vietnam for several years. Here, for several years shows the adjunct of duration because it presents how long did she work in Vietnam. The third classification is the time frequency. Time frequency adjuncts indicate the frequency with which the action denoted by the verb occurs. The time frequency is classified into two, definite and indefinite frequencies. In the definite frequency, we can define the frequency occasion, how many time, and the frequency of period, how often. Frequency of occasion often use the words once, twice, and etc. For the example, Peter went to the library 3 times. 3 times tells how many times had Peter went to the library. For the frequency of period, the words daily, nightly, weekly, every month, or each year are sometimes used to define how often does an event occur. For the example, Peter went to the library daily. Daily signifies how often does the subject went to the library. The other classification is the indefinite frequency, where it has 4 kinds. The first, usual occurrence. This kind uses the words normally, generally, ordinarily, commonly, and usually. As the example says, Kristine usually has pizza for dinner. Usually serves as the usual occurrence. For the second kind, the universal frequency. It uses always, continually, permanently, constantly, and incessantly. For example, I always go to the school on foot. Always is the universal frequency. The third is high frequency. The words often, time and again, repeatedly, frequently, regularly are used to define. For example, he often does housework. Often here serves as the high frequency. The last one is low frequency. It uses the words occasionally, rarely, seldom, never, and infrequently. As As the example says, he rarely goes to school on time. Rarely serves as the low frequency kind of adjunct. The fourth and last classification of adjuncts of time is the time relationship adjuncts. Time relationship adjuncts express a relationship between two time positions, typically denoting a temporal sequence. Example, when did Peter previously visit his mother? Second, typically implying a concessive relation. I cannot get it now. Third, typically contrasting one time with another. You should try again. We will now tackle the third semantic rule of adjuncts, which is the process adjuncts. Process adjuncts are used to express how the action happened or the state existed. Establish the instrument used to accomplish an action or the measure of the action, state, quality that they modify. Process adjuncts are classified into adjuncts of means, instrument, and agency. Both the means and agent are often expressed with by phrases, but the latter is grammatically distinct in correlating with the passive and hence corresponding to a transitive clause. An example of means is, I go to school by car. When the word itself, by car, is an adjunct of means. An example of agent can be, her windows were broken by Jack. In here, by Jack is a phrase which denotes the adjuncts of agent. Instrument adjuncts differ from both means and agent adjuncts in generally being realized by with phrases. An example is, you can cut the bread with that knife. In here, the phrase with that knife signifies the adjunct of instrument. The last but not the least semantic role of adjuncts is the adjuncts of contingency. With contingency relations, adjuncts are often used for reason and its correlate purpose, both of which can be elicited by the same question forms why and what for. It has 5 classifications: the reason, purpose, result, conditional, and concession adjuncts. The first classification is reason adjuncts. As well as by finite clauses, reason adjuncts are realized by prepositional phrases and non-finite clauses. Examples: she died of cancer. Second, he bought the book because of his interest in maths. The underlined words started with prepositions which make them prepositional phrases. The second classification is purpose adjuncts. Purpose adjuncts are realized by non-finite clauses. For example, he goes to the gym every day to keep fit. In this sentence, the phrase to keep fit is its non-finite clause. Yet, purpose adjuncts can also be realized by finite clauses. For example, we should bring an umbrella in case it rains. The phrase in case it rains is the finite clause. Next is result adjuncts. Result adjuncts are used to show a result or effect. Example, we felt hungry, so we stopped to have some sandwiches. As a result of feeling hungry, the effect is we stopped to have some sandwiches. This signifies an adjunct of result. The next is conditional adjuncts. Conditional adjuncts shows some conditional statements. For example, if you lend me some money, I'll pay it back to you soon. The phrase, if you lend me some money, shows the conditional statement. Another example, you can be absent from school provided that you do all the homework. In here, provided that you can do all the homework is the conditional statement. It says here that you can be absent from school, but only if you can do all the homework. And this is the conditional statement. The last classification of contingency adjuncts is the concession adjuncts. When the concessive relation is expressed by an adjunct, this takes the form of a prepositional phrase. Example, he went to class although he was sick. Second, he bought the ring for her despite his lack of money. In the first sentence, the phrase, although he was sick, is the concessive adjunct. On the second sentence, the phrase, despite his lack of money, shows the concessive adjunct. And here ends my discussion about adjuncts and its semantic roles, such as the adjuncts of space, adjuncts of time, process adjuncts, and adjuncts of contingency. I am hoping that you have learned something from this discussion. Thank you and God bless.
Hello, I'm Guan, and in this part, I am going to discuss semantic and structural differences between adjuncts and arguments. First, I will explain the distinction of adjuncts and arguments in their meaning, on how they are different from each other semantically. Then, I will explain the differences in structures. I will show you how they are used and identified in a sentence. I will provide examples to further elaborate their differences. But before discussing the differences of adjuncts and arguments, the thing they have in common is that they belong in grammatical function together with subjects, predicates, objects, and so on. Let us first define adjuncts and arguments. Adjuncts. Adjuncts is adverb that added in a clause by following the flow from the clause. However, it is not structurally required in a clause and it is only an additional information. In a sentence independent clause, the adverb functions explains the verb, adjective, and other adverb. So this explains adjuncts is a constituent of sentence or clause. So apart from subject, verb, complements, the sentence or clause may also contain constituents which are not structurally required. It is optional to add this to a sentence or clause. It will only give additional information about place, time, purpose, manner, or degree. The function of adjuncts are time adverbial, manner adverbial, and so on. Next, arguments. Arguments are the participants or entities that are necessarily involved in the situation identified by the predicate. Argument is a set of ideas that support a point. In linguistics, it is an expression that helps complete the meaning of a predicate, the latter referring to this context to the main verb and its auxiliaries. Most predicate takes one, two, or three arguments. So arguments is needed in a sentence in order to support the predicate. The subject and complements together are said to be the argument of the predicate. Let's now distinguish arguments from adjuncts from their provided meaning, definitions of the two. I jot down and highlighted some parts from their definition. So these are: adjunct is not structurally required in a clause and it is only an additional information, while argument is an expression that helps complete the meaning of the predicate. It is necessarily involved in the situation identified by the predicate. For example, my brother bought an expensive car last weekend. So this example has a prepositional phrase, last weekend, and this serves as an additional information on when did the buying happen. This is an adverbial adjunct indicating time. Even without the indicated time, last weekend, this clause can still stand on its own. My brother bought an expensive car. The predicate bought needs an argument, which are the subject, my brother, the one who did the buying, and the object, expensive car, something was bought. If without the arguments, the predicate will lose its meaning. This sentence can stand alone together with its arguments, the subject and object or complements, even without adjuncts. So if we did not mention that it was last weekend that the brother bought an expensive car, it doesn't change the fact that he bought an expensive car. The adjunct doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. It was added to the sentence to indicate the time it was bought, for an extra information only. My brother bought an expensive car. So what if we remove one argument of the predicate? It affects the meaning of the entire sentence. My brother bought. Someone did the buying, which is my brother. But what did he bought? The sentence structure is lacking. This explains that arguments are essential in a sentence. To quickly restate it, adjunct is supplementary while argument is oblique. Here's now the differences of adjuncts and arguments in terms of their structures or the arrangement of the words in a sentence. So let's take a look at this picture. Based on the picture, we will try to create a sentence to describe adjuncts and arguments. Let's say, for example, this girl is Anna. You can see in the picture a crowd and all are wearing masks. So we can say the verb is wearing. It can be Anna and the verb wore, and what does she wear? The mask. So let's put it together. Anna wore a mask. Basically, this sentence has a subject which is Anna and a predicate wore a mask, which wore is the verb and a mask is the object or the complement. This is a complete sentence having subject and a predicate. Every complete sentence has a predicate and arguments. Predicate always takes an argument. So in this predicate, or a mask is the argument of the verb or. So if we take the subject Anna out of the clause, now we only have wore a mask. But we are not allowed to just say wore a mask. Well, yes, it can still be understandable, but it doesn't complete the thought of the sentence. That is why arguments are essential in a sentence. Now let's take a look at this sentence. So you noticed I added the phrase in the public. The phrase is providing some information about the verb or about did where was Anna when she was wearing the mask. So this is an adjunct. Adjunct often has preposition to indicate time, place, and so on. In this case, this phrase in the public is what we call prepositional phrase with a preposition in. However, we did not actually need to know where did she wore mask for it to be grammatically complete. That is the role of the adjunct. Now let's take another example. I created some examples using this picture. In this example, we can already determine which are the subject, verb, object, and arguments. Joseph is the subject in the sentence, the one who gives something. This subject is complementing the word gave, makes it the argument, and the flower is the direct object who shall be taken as the argument by the predicate. So when we say Joseph gave, it leaves the clause hanging and not a complete clause. Yes, there's one argument in the clause Joseph gave. It is the subject Joseph. But remember what I've said earlier. Predicate always takes an argument. And in this clause, the predicate itself doesn't take the argument. That can be a direct object. To put it simple, the role of the argument is to make the thought of the sentence complete. Now let's take another example to further elaborate the structures of adjunct. Joy accepted the flower wholeheartedly. Now we have an adverb in the sentence. This adverb wholeheartedly modifies the verb accepted. This this adverb is giving information on how Joy accepted the flower. As another example, adverbial adjuncts can often appear in variety of positions within a single sentence, as these examples illustrated. It can be in the first, middle, or the last part of the sentence. Okay, to summarize, again, adjunct is not necessarily be added in a sentence. It is just supplementary in a sentence or clause in order to provide further information. It is attached to a clause optionally. It is only it only modifies a verb to amplify its meaning. Adjunct Adjuncts doesn't change the level of the projection. Arguments do. On the other hand, arguments are the complement of predicate. It is an essential part of the sentence structure. It is the main structural element of the sentence. So just to add some fact before we end this topic, there are some instances that sentence doesn't need a direct object as an argument. It is possible to use only one argument of predicate, which is subject, depending on the verb. For example, Joy walked. So there is always a confusion with the arguments and adjuncts. That is why the goal of this discussion is to clarify the differences of the two. So I hope I've explained it clearly to you. So this is the last topic for this group report, and we will be talking about clause and phrase. I think so far all of us know already what are these two, or have an idea what are these two in a sentence. So let's just have a brief discussion or review on what is clause and phrase. And after that, we will illustrate the word relationship between the clause and phrase using X bar model. So let's begin. It is a group of words that usually contains a finite verb and often arguments of the verb. To make it simple, it is a group of words that contain subject and verb. It is what we call clause. So even though clause have its subject and verb, not all clauses can be a complete sentence on its own. Some clauses do, and some cannot. These types of clauses are independent clause or main clause, dependent clause, or subordinate clause. The main clause can stand on their own and can form a complete sentence by themselves. For example, Jenny walked. Jenny is the subject and walk is the verb and or predicate. You see, this clause only contains two words, but it functions as an independent clause because it doesn't need another context to support it. It is already a complete sentence on its own. It is an independent clause. While subordinate clause depends on the main clause. Although this clause have a verb and can be arguments or complements, they do not express complete thought. For example, even though it is raining. This example doesn't make sense on its own as a sentence, so it needs another context to complete it. Say, for example, even though it is raining, I finished my laundry. So this sentence has now two clauses, the independent and the dependent clause, and it has already a complete thought. Phrases. Phrases are groups of words organized around what is called a head word, which is obligatory. So this means it is not grammatical to omit this word, and which determines the grammatical nature of the phrase. So if the head is a verb, the phrase is a verb phrase. Head words can be verb, noun, adjective, adverbs, or preposition. Phrases is a basic constituent of clauses along with subordinate clauses. There are different types of phrases depending on the head word. So here are the examples of phrases. Noun phrase. The underlined word is the head word in the sentence in the phrase. Verb phrase. Adjective phrase. Adverb phrase. And prepositional phrase. So on the whole, clauses and phrases are building blocks of language that are larger than phonemes, morphemes, and words, and smaller than sentences and utterances. The clause is a group of words that usually contains a finite verb and often arguments of the verb. Clauses are the basic elements of what is called an utterance in oral language and a sentence in written language. Utterances and sentences are considered complex if they contain two or more clauses, whereas simple utterances and sentences are made of one clause only. A phrase is a group of words that forms a meaningful unit within a clause. It is characterized as the grammatical unit as a level between the word and the clause. It is usually built around verbs, nouns, adjectives, or adverbs. So in some cases, the phrase can be a clause in itself or contain clauses and other phrases within it. So now that we've discussed clause and phrase, let us now try to illustrate these two using X bar model. First, we will illustrate phrase. So this is how a phrase is organized. This is a X bar model that has 3 levels. This XP right here indicates that this can be any type of phrase such as NP or noun phrase, VP, verb phrase, etc. And the X right here can be any category or classes like verb, adjective, and so on. The phrase has its specifier. It can be a degree or a determiner. Words like the or this. Okay. Specifier are the sister of subphrase within a phrase. So this X right here is the subphrase of this XP and the sister of specifier. Okay, to make it well organized, we must indicate this thing right here, the X with an apostrophe. It is a X bar level. So the X bar level let us show differing levels of constituency. So this node assign classes such as X to determine the head and complements. So take note that sometimes a phrase doesn't contain a complement in some instances. I'll show that on the next slide. We have here a phrase, the girl. So it is a noun phrase because of the word girl that serves as the head of the phrase. And the head is the word that determines syntactic category of the phrase. So girl is a noun. That is why this became a noun phrase. I already drew an illustration of this phrase and I label this as NP or noun phrase. So the phrase has its determiner, which is the word the, and it is the specifier of our noun phrase. So the word girl is the noun head of our NP. So I place it right after N bar level. Notice that I did not just put N right here and directly touch the head. It is because labeling bar level is important in X bar. It is to give us hierarchy that allows us to properly put words into its places that will show its correct sentence structure. We would not know what part goes with other part if we will not indicate the noun phrase at the bar level, and the whole model will be flat. Here's another illustration. In this phrase, you notice it is much similar from the previous one, but this time it has an adjective, beautiful, that complements the head girl. You see in the illustration, there are changes from the previous tree diagram. Again, we labeled it as NP or noun phrase. So right here, I placed the specifier of the noun phrase, which is the determiner the. Now it is a complement, so the branches in the n bar level are assigned to us a, p, and n. The word beautiful is an adjective, right? Making it a part of adjective phrase, so I put ap right here. Then the word girl is our noun head, and I place it right here after the label n, or noun. So there might be changes in the phrase compared to the previous one, but this doesn't change the category of this phrase as a noun phrase, even though there is an additional word, beautiful, an adjective. It is just a complement of the head. Complements are sisters of head. Take a look from this verb phrase, reads quickly. So let us not be confused of what phrase it is. Although this phrase is a little bit confusing, but there is an easy way to identify if what phrase it is. Not because the word read is the first one, it makes it as verb phrase. No. Word reads is a verb and quickly is an adverb. Obviously, reads doesn't complement quickly, but the word quickly is the one modifies the verb read. So the word quickly describe how it was read. So from this consideration, the head word is verb reads, and it is a verb phrase. So I labeled it as verb phrase. Again, the head word of verb phrase is the word reads. So I place it right here, right after the verb bar level. Then this adverb phrase here is also a constituent or subphrase in the verb phrase we have. The word quickly is an adverb, making it as a part of adverb phrase. We already know and understand how to illustrate a phrase using X bar model. So as phrases part of a clause or sentence, we can now illustrate the word relationship in the sentence or clauses having phrases in it. I have here an independent clause. Consider this sentence: I eat bananas every meal. First, let us determine the category of phrases or phrases here to make it easy for us to draw a tree diagram. So this sentence right here has a noun phrase and a verb phrase. The pronoun I serve as the noun phrase and or noun head, and the eat bananas every meal is the verb phrase. Then this verb phrase here also consists of noun phrase and of course verb. Eat is the head of this verb phrase and the remaining is the noun phrase. The remaining noun phrase has a noun head, bananas, and a prepositional phrase, every meal. Finally, the prepositional phrase has a preposition every and a noun meal. So from this step-by-step, um, wait, from this step-by-step process, we can easily illustrate a tree diagram because we already identified the category of phrases and where did it belong So let us now illustrate this sentence. The different constituents of the sentence are shown in this tree diagram. We labeled the the sentence from the previous slide rather, as S stands for sentence, as this independent clause is a sentence on its own and there is no symbol for clause. I write here as a noun head in noun phrase belongs to the noun phrase. This noun phrase is a specifier of our sentence or S. Then this is our entire verb phrase, specifically having verb it as its head. The noun phrase right here, as a constituent of our verb phrase, has branches assigned to us noun and prepositional phrase. And of course, bananas is the head of this noun phrase. Lastly, in this part, here is the preposition noun phrase, a constituent of our noun phrase, having the word every as its preposition and meal is a noun. So this just shows that it is important to know first how to illustrate phrase in tree diagram for us to easily illustrate a whole clause or sentences consisting phrases in it. Bringing this to an end, this entire this entire illustration is syntax tree diagram that shows the structure of the clause of the independent clause we have, the I eat bananas every meal. So the reason why we need the syntax trees in the first place is to give structure to how sentence mean, what they do, and have the word order that they do. So that ends my discussion about clause and phrase and the expert theory and also our group report. I hope you enjoyed learning. Thank you. Thank you guys and happy learning.